And then the first thing that I'm going to look at is my background all around this plant. What value is my background? And I'm going to clean out this little tiny brush, put it to the side, and I'm looking for something with a little more width. This is a little larger maybe than I need. It's a size 8 filbert, but I think I'm gonna go for that. I like how the filberts take the corners. And then I wanna think about getting my background value in so that I can base all the other values off of that. And so right here, not going for white, going for slightly off-white. And really, I could go both of these. Now, to my eye, they appear way lighter than this newsprint color. So I can even come up here and go a little darker. And most importantly, I'm just going to come in and get that white value of the paper covered up. And I'm gonna maybe not push it quite as dark as the newsprint, but I'm definitely coming in here and deepening this value. And I did add some water to that paint, but it's a little thicker and fuller, quite a bit thicker and fuller than my initial kind of watery wash was for the line work of my underpainting. But I keep coming over here and adding some. One, I want that color to stretch. And it's okay if I'm like jumping back and forth between these three values. I don't have to have a flat, consistent value in the background. I just have to have something kind of close. And there's some areas in between these branches and stems that I'll need to come in with a smaller brush. Right now it feels enjoyable to use this bigger brush to try to not be too fussy and just get filled in across here. If I make a mistake and actually cover up a line I'm gonna need, I can always put that line back in.
Jolyn?
Uh-huh.
Can you tell us a little more about that brush? Because this is where I have a lot of trouble, and I think it's because all of my big brushes are round.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you've noticed, I don't use very many round brushes.
Yeah.
So this is a filbert. What a filbert is a round brush pressed flat. And so it's also a bristle brush. The bristles are hard. They're made from pig hair, actually. And it's a pretty standard brush that you can find at the store. The other thing that's I think what really works for me is that there's the flat side that gives me the wider mark, but I go a lot on the thin side that gives me a sharper, thinner mark like a flat or a round brush would. And I like being able to kind of jump back and forth, particularly in a situation like this where I have very full strokes, and then when I'm coming in between in these smaller areas, I'm turning it on its side.
You said that was size 8? Is that what you said?
This one's a size 8. I think that may be a little, I'm very efficient at using a brush, so there's a lot of confidence in how I put my paint on, and a size 8 for any of you might be a little challenging to get into these like nooks and crannies. So maybe like a size 6 for this size paper would be like I just don't happen to have a size 6 filbert handy, so I grabbed the 8. Also, it really did work well to cover these bigger areas. And like as I come in here for these tight spots, I would recommend getting a smaller one. I could even go back to my little sable brush, white sable, and just use that to get these spots in. Whoops, I covered my line up a little bit, that's okay. I think you can see like how much this changed just with getting that background value in. And like when I squint at the edge of this paper, it's pretty close to what the newsprint value is. Like I don't see right here where the light's hitting it like a big strong line of difference. Is it perfect? No, nothing needs to be perfect here, it just needs to work. And then up here, like this value I painted first is a little lighter and that's coming in darker. I just take some water and smooth it out if I don't want there to be a strong line of difference. And then pulling this bigger brush across, so wet on wet paint, just to kind of, if there's like some transitions in values and I want it to be softer, I can just use another brush to kind of wipe in around there. And Rachel, did I answer your brush question?
Yeah, I think I don't have a brush that allows me to angle very much. So I've had a lot of struggles with getting close enough to my subject, and then I'm using like a million different brushes. And
Well, yeah.
It just ends up looking really distracting, like just my background.
I have 40 different brushes to choose from, and I usually use like 5 or 6 per painting, but I highly recommend getting some filberts. I think of the filbert is like the one that's the most versatile, especially for a bigger brush. It'll hold a lot of paint, but it also, with a flat brush, when you try to go around your corners, you run into problems where some of that the extra bristles that are over here and here, they kind of jump out and get into areas that you don't want them to be in, whereas this, as you go around a corner, it just behaves itself better. Doesn't jump out of bounds.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. I heard a beep and that always makes me concerned. I'm like, is there a battery dying somewhere? But everything looks good. So just coming in here with my lower brush and getting into some of these smaller areas. Once again, right here, you can see this is darker. There's a value jump between there. If I don't want that to be so strong, and just take this other brush and kind of smooth it out in between. Some of these value jumps, where it's lighter here and a little darker in here between the plants, it adds interest. It's like music when it's composed and you hear it go up and down. Like, you want to allow that in your painting too. And so I'm just grabbing some more of this value, pulling it in here across this top piece. So before I go any further, I'm gonna clean this brush out. I've been really terrible when I'm teaching of laying brushes with paint over the side. I don't like to leave them just sit in the water because it rots out the ferrules and the brushes don't last as long. So I'm just kind of cleaning this off and then I'll wipe it off with a clean rag. At the end of class, I'll wash them off in the sink and I'll use some brush conditioner soap from Winsor & Newton to clean it off. So just kind of clean that off. And this brush is a Utrecht Filbert size number 8. And yeah, I highly recommend it. You can buy them in packs. It's like about $40 for a pack of, I think, 6 or 8 brushes. And it's worth it. Oh, and before I move too much forward, I can see right here I missed a bit of my background, and it's not really a big problem, but might as well get that painted in there. Now, a couple things. I'm gonna lift this off the newsprint because I don't want it dry, like to kind of glue itself there. Another piece of paper that's white that I'm just gonna lay down here to put in between. Sometimes I have these taped down to boards and that works really well too. The next thing I'm looking for, I wanted to get that like middle value kind of landed. Now I want to think about the darker value, particularly right here in the center of my plant. So I have, this very dark soil. So might as well just go ahead. Now my water's become pretty, so a lot of white in it, a lot of white pigment. And if I had a sink candy here in my studio, I'd probably go over and get some clean water. But I feel like I can probably still get a really dark value. But it is, especially when we get to color mixing, be very aware of your water quality because that can affect. And so across here, in the back, I can see that this is very dark. Now, as I'm putting my dark color on, ultramarine blue is actually a little transparent when it's not mixed with white. So I can see quite a bit of the white paper through the back. That just means I can do another layer of that after it dries and start to get it to feel a little fuller. One step down with the white in it is more opaque. So I'm going that direction. I can see the side of the container. But for now, I'm not going to worry too much about trying to describe what's in there. I'm just going to try to get some of that feeling of depth from the dark. I can come in and put some lighter touches in over top after this dries. And it feels like it's receding. I'm getting that feeling as I look down in it. And then there's the trick of, there's like a little bit of a glare on the side of this box. Haven't thought through how I want to handle that, but I'm going to go ahead and fill in where I see these darker values. But I'm doing it pretty gesturally, and I'm not trying to be perfect about it. I already have my line work, so I'm just going in and filling in, but leaving some of those white lines kind of stick out on top. There's a line across here, and then it's darker right here. Depending how I sit, I can slightly see it come across here. If you ever want to see some fun plant paintings, gosh, what's her name? Katerina Kubrick, or Catherine Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick's wife, the movie writer and director. She's a pretty accomplished painter. She's fun to look up and look at her work, and she does a lot of interesting, beautifully colored paintings of plants. She was also an actress. I think that's how they met, but now she's a painter. So what I'm happy with about the values of this box is that the dark value being in the center, it does feel to me when I'm looking at the picture like that recedes. Some of these white little lines that are gestural, not a perfect drawing or rendition of what I'm looking at, but you get that feeling of like the light hitting the plastic. At some point I might choose to do a wash over there and knock those whites back, but I kind of like how they're breaking everything up. So then I'm noticing I'm adding a little water over here. This pile of paint's almost gone. I missed some spots for the background color over here. So I'm coming in and getting those pushed back. I think when I was looking at it initially, I thought they were leaves. And now I'm just gonna work from this dark out and think about the color of the stem. It has to be lighter than the actual soil in that box. So I picked this value and I think that's working. It comes out across as lighter, but what I'm going to do is let this dry, and then in the segments of how the stem feels, it's kind of segmented, I'll pull some lights across here and there. But for now, and I'm still, as I look at this leaf, it has these white variegations on. I'm not gonna worry about that. I'm gonna squint at the leaf and think about the main value of it, which I think is right here and maybe slightly lighter. So I'm taking some water, I'm taking this middle value I mixed, and I'm pulling it a little lighter. And now I'm going to try it and see how it looks on here. I do not have to stay in the lines that I painted. I can use my paint to be more descriptive of the leaf. Now to my eye, that leaf could go a little lighter. Particularly, I want it to come forward. So I'm doing some wet on wet paint with that value to make it lighter, but I also know that later on, when it dries, I can come back and do another layer. So if I don't like the values that I choose at first, I can easily change them. That feels a little better. It's coming forward, and it makes me think differently about the stem that I initially painted. So seeing the stem next to the leaf makes me think, well, I want to get some of these darks in on here. So I'm going ahead and I'm painting some of those lines, and then there's actually more negative space between this leaf and the stem. I've moved also the plant around a few times, so it may have changed my viewpoint. But I want to make sure that there's that they're not competing too much, and I want that leaf to feel lighter and come across. Now, Yeah, I really have moved it around so it's in a different spot. Coming back in with the stem. So now we're looking at the stem against the background, and it should be significantly darker. So I'm coming up to this next value. I'm going just to go ahead and paint in these whiter stems. You know, when I'm making a painting, I might choose to leave them white and light like that, just because I like the description or I like the line, and I can make those choices not to follow the value, but instead to allow the lines to be more interesting. But because this is a value study, I don't want to fall back on the strength of my line work as much. I want to come in here and try to get these values. So I'm coming in with a fairly dark value to describe all these stems. In places, what I'm seeing, they're darker and lighter in different places, but I can come in and do layers of darker or lighter over top. I'm going to let those darker lines underneath dry. Before I try to do any other evaluation, I think as far as like the value I chose, how it looks laying against this background, I feel pretty good about it. What I'd like to do is look for areas that I can see that some of these are lighter and describe them differently. But now I'm going to work on getting these leaf colors in here, and I'm kind of squinting at my leaves to see where the light's hitting them and where they're darker. So for example, this leaf is lighter. And the one underneath is a lot darker. Partially the one above it is taking some of the light away from it. So just to play with the value. And I'm back to using my little brush. My feeling is that the value jump that I just painted between these two leaves is a little too much. There's not that much difference. And this leaf underneath is dark right here, but as it comes out, the light hits it more and it lightens up over here. So just wet on wet, I'm taking this lighter value and wiping it in on top. Now, the leaf that comes across here, I'm also going to take some wet paint . I want that feeling of it being sitting on top of the other one. So it's coming forward, the value's lighter, this one's pushed down. There's this whole tricky piece of the stem of this one coming in front of the other. And so one thing that I can do is try to get in here for this tight little spot and really darken that value so that it pushes the stem in front. Now there's a lot of paint building up on my brush, so it's getting a little tricky, and it's time for me to clean off my brush. I think you can see how I left the value of the stem a little lighter and pushed the leaf darker. And it looks like that to me in life. I'm not even making that up, although I'm totally capable of making something like that up in order to make my painting look more interesting. It just happens to be the way it is in life. So I'm wiping my brush off because I've got like 4 different values pushed up into the ferrule of it. So now it's pretty clean. And one thing I'm noticing is that right here in the middle of this leaf, there's like a darker line as the ridge comes down to the tip. That's all the more I'm gonna worry about those 2 leaves right now. And then I have this one right here. I'm going to go ahead and make it between the 2 values that I just painted. I'm adding some water too because this is a smaller spot. And when the paint has enough moisture in it, it's a little easier for me to control. Once again, I think it could go a little lighter, so I'm taking some lighter, thicker paint and just painting how the light hits it. If I accidentally pushed it too light, I can always come back in and darken it up later. Now, this one up top here is actually, I can see by squinting that the value of this leaf is darker on top of the leaf underneath. From your viewpoint, they look the same. From my viewpoint, that one's a little darker. I don't know how that'll look when I paint it, but I'm gonna give it a try. It's just the angle of it's getting hit by the light differently. And then on the top, it's a little lighter. So I'm coming over here. It also has the variegation on it that I'm ignoring for this value study because I want to focus on the form value, not like if we were painting seashells right now and they were speckled, I would not be painting those speckles on the seashells. That's like the last thing I can say about the surface. Now, this value went too light, so close to the background. So I can just go ahead with some wet paint and kind of come in here and layer that darker color over top. It's called wet on wet. Usually I would go ahead and be painting the red study and the yellow study today very quickly on a very like simplified object. We're not going to get that far. This just took me more time than usual, and I think that what we've been talking about, what I've been talking about to you while you listen, has been really valuable. So if you want to work this week on your own with the yellow and the red studies, and if we were in the classroom, I don't always even demo this. I just make people do it, and then I'm right there watching what you're doing and kind of pushing you one direction or the other. We don't have that luxury here with all the distance between us. So if you do quick studies in monochromatics, that's great, but if you want to take a little more time with it, I think it's valuable. And I'll check in with everybody from noon until 12:30. And what I'm just doing here is trying to get my paint filled in now. I'm looking at the values, grabbing what I think is the closest value. And so there's this thing right here between these two leaves. They're kind of competing. And the one on top is darker. And in my viewpoint, it comes down over that other leaf. So I'm just going ahead allowing it to be as big as its true self really is. So I have this dark leaf in the background, I have this one coming across here, and then I have this kind of interesting, more middle-toned leaf. I'm afraid if I paint it the color that I'm seeing, it's just going to look like the background, but I'm going to give it a whirl. The underside where it folds over on top of itself is a little darker. I think this value here is too light. So just once again, wet on wet, kind of blending some darker values in here. If it gets too confusing, and for me, I'm running out of time from my example, but I just go ahead and put a line in here. It's not necessarily true to value, but it creates a description. And this just happens to be a bit of a trickier spot here with this leaf coming across. As I move the plan around and it shifts, what I can see is that this leaf actually isn't as big as I painted it. The one behind it is the largest leaf on the plant. So we'll see if we can get it to kind of sit on top. So while this leaf in the background is kind of large, it's grown. It's almost the size of the container now, which is a bit of an exaggeration of what's really going on. So I'm going to try to get some of my background color pulled together and just come in with my brush and kind of cut that back. This is called reduction. When you reduce something in your painting by taking another value or a color to push it back. And I'm having to take my brush and mix from these two piles of paint to get that background color now because I used it up earlier. For me, it can often be easier to describe something with reduction. I can see better. That's not always the case for everybody that I work with. I think like a printmaker in some ways, and so that kind of modeling or moving things around with negative spaces, it's a trick of the mind. I'm taking water with this big brush and kind of smoothing out these gradations in my background. Not sure how they'll dry, but because what I can see is that value that I mixed was a little darker and it's just sitting on top. So that's good enough for now for that spot. And then I'm going to jump up here and try to get these filled in. While I might come across, I hope, as a fairly thoughtful teacher, I'm not actually the most thoughtful painter. I paint very fast and I paint responsively. So this sort of analysis that I'm describing to you, I do quite quickly in my practice, and I'm doing it for your benefit. So if you're feeling like, well, do you have to be that thoughtful in everything you do? No, I just think it helps for you to have that extra information. And but if you find when you're painting, especially outside of this specific exercise, that you're making quicker, more intuitive choices, but I really want to encourage you to do that. I'm just doing this as an example and slowing down so that you can get some extra information. But how I'm painting right now, like with this kind of gestural, like filling in, that's actually more true to my own practice. So I was kind of messing around here a little bit with this dark in the actual flower pot, and I made a halo around the leaf by accident, so I'm taking some wet paint, just mostly water, on my brush and trying to push that back. As I look over this, it's not finished, it's just a study, but I don't think that I would probably work on it much more. I am looking at how these whites are really popping out, so I'm making kind of a watery, hopefully neutral mixture. I want to knock them down so they're not the whitest of white on my painting. And when I squint, there's a subtle shadow. Let's see if I can imitate that across here and under here. Now, it doesn't have an edge like I just painted it, So I can kind of take my brush and pull that out away. And then I'm taking a clean rag, I hope it is as I grab it, and sort of softly pulling that extra paint and moisture off that's creating the line along the shadow in this picture should be almost a token. You wouldn't really want to notice it, but if I was paying attention, I could see it. And then in that, I lost the corner of my container a little bit, so deepening that here. This line across the top, oop, that got darker than I wanted. Although it doesn't hurt the composition of the painting, just sort of feathering it out a bit. All right, it is noon. I'm gonna make my last marks on here, which involve pushing the value of this leaf that's in the background a little darker. The paint's still quite wet, so I'd almost have to let it dry before I could get that layer on there the way I really want it. But it does the trick for now. Quickly, if you wanted to do some fast little studies,